For my first question, how often do you get stopped by someone who recognizes your voice but isn't 100% sure where they heard it before?
It's actually very rare, which is lovely because I'm sure I'd become a paranoid personality if I were, an on-camera guy. I can tell you two incidents. One was at LAX at the airport, and it was a very old lady who was managing the cash register at a little convenience shop inside one of the terminals. And I recognize your voice. Aren't you that fella on Channel 7? And I said, ma'am, you have made my month, my year. Oh, well, thank you. And the other time was I was buying a cheap suit in downtown LA,
Mhm.
where you can buy what looks like a $1,200 suit for like 99 bucks.
Right.
And the guy fitting me, I think I was kind of a wiseacre. He said something, well, it doesn't fit because blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, now I know, and knowing's half the battle. And he goes, wait a minute, man, who are you? Well, no, no. And then we had a fun chat. And the actually there's a third one. It was a comic book store on
Mhm.
8th Street in Manhattan in New York.
Uh-huh.
I forget the name of the store, but it'd been around for decades. I think it's still around. And the young guy was manning the store, small place. And I said, do you have any G.I. Joe comics or action figures? And he looked at me like, what is this old creep doing in my store? And he said, no, and walked away. And I think I did the same thing. I said, well, now I know, and knowing's half the battle. And he turned around and looked at me with this kind of look of terror, disappeared, came back about 5 minutes later with a mint unopened GI Joe comic book with Lady J and Flint on the cover, and said, I want to apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You have 10% lifetime discount in our store, and I'd like to give you this comic book and have you sign another." But that's it, Craig.
Yeah,
It never happens. I
that's so
go I
funny.
go through my life unrecognized.
Well, like I told you, when I first moved to LA, I was listening to ABC 7 Eyewitness News, like a commercial on the radio. I was like, that sounds like Flint from G.I. Joe. What's going on here? And, I do notice some voices from the show doing other voiceovers.
Right.
Uh,
Well, this is
yeah.
really good news, and this makes a lot of sense to me because that was the coolest gig I've ever had. I mean, it was like 1983, and they auditioned literally hundreds of us. I went to the audition in Studio City at the Wally Burr recording studio, this tiny little place, and just a half a mile from Universal Studios. And it was a nice spring day, but there were literally 100 people lined up
Oh,
out
wow.
the door of the studio, down the steps, down the sidewalk, all of us holding these kind of crude black and white Xeroxes of drawings of the characters we were auditioning for. I had one of Flint with his beret and his big pectoral muscles, and Mary McDonald Lewis, who I knew was close to me, and she was going, "Yo, Joe, yo, Joe," and so we all auditioned. We didn't know what it was for because
Mhm.
they were kind of, it was the years when Hasbro was having trouble. GI Joe was a big seller. The 12-inch the 11.5-inch GI Joe was a big seller through the 70s, and then people got tired of it. And there are theories, historical theories, that the Vietnam War dragged on. People got tired of war toys for their kids, and by the end of the 70s, Hasbro's stock was in the toilet. And so they dreamed up the Joe team, auditioned so many of us, and we didn't know really what it was we were auditioning for. A mini series. It's a mini series. That's it.
It was the Revenge of Cobra, right?
Yeah,
When you did.
5 episodes,
Yeah.
and they called my agent at about like 4 or 5 weeks later. Well, you got the part. What part? Flint. Who's Flint? GI Joe. What? Oh, that audition. And so we did 5 episodes. Michael Bell as Duke, Mary Mack as Lady J, etc. And then that was the end of it. And the networks did not want it because parent groups had actually become active in protesting and saying, we're not going to buy any Hasbro toys if you have this war show on television. We don't want to see people die. So they actually altered some of the scripts. Instead of dying in plane crashes, they would just parachute out over the horizon.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that.
Oh yeah, totally. And also like the lasers would be flying everywhere and nobody would ever get hit.
No, not at all. Yeah, no death, no death. And then in a couple of weeks, because the networks didn't want it, um, Sunbow and Hasbro had to literally wear out tons of shoe leather, sending their sales forces around to large and small TV groups all over the country, saying, we'll give your kid a GI Joe action figure if you air this. And they were successful enough so that probably got 60 stations around the country, and went on the air and showed once a week. And we produced, I think, 13 episodes at a time. And then when there'd be months would go by, we would record, we do 13 more. And then suddenly one day, producer said, here, and handed me a slew of papers with all ending with "now you know" and "knowing's half the battle." These 30-second scripts about, come on, Bobby, don't throw baseballs through your neighbor's window. Sally might get hit in the head, and you want to be a good neighbor. And now you know. And I said, what are these? You're not going to get paid extra. Just read them. They're public service announcements to advertise the show and as a sop to the parent groups, to sort of mitigate any growing anti-GI Joe protest movement. And Disney used to do that in the back of their books, these awful little morality, pages, little stories. And anyway, so that's the story of the casting of GI Joe. Transformers was done exactly the same way at the same time.
Well, you also played Flint on Transformers.
Flint's father.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't know
Yeah.
that was his father. I thought it was Flint in the future or something like that. But
Yeah, no, Dashiell Fairborn Sr.
oh, I did not realize that. Okay, see, I
And
learned something today.
there was a kind of a sexy scene with Flint and Lady J on the roof of Joe headquarters. It was a sunscreen scene. Hey, Lady J, you can borrow the sunscreen, or I could put it on for you. I mean, but
Wow.
that was as sexy as the show got. But apparently, not apparently, factually, suddenly their daughter appears in Transformers.
Yes, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
Right. And so it was the ghost of Flint's father,
Okay.
the grandfather, who with white hair appears in a scene with Miss Fairborn in Transformers.
When you were recording for GI Joe, did you do it in a room with other voice actors, or did
Yes.
you do it okay?
Yeah. Unlike today, and I you probably know better than I why there's some kind of technical reason that the game producers record actors by themselves. They want the freedom and ability to move the voices back and forth, and they probably want it done in a particular studio with a particular EQ and microphone and so on. But we recorded in the fabulous Wally Burr recording facility, just this small, 2-story building shared with probably a toenail parlor next door. And they would record 6 to 8 of us at a time, and they would set up 8 mic stands next to each other, and we'd put on headsets. They would ask us to not overlap, to not do what's done in film and television. We were talking at the same time, for reasons of naturalism, so that we would pause for a microsecond between lines, so they would have the ability to move them around and separate or put a reaction sound effect or something. But they recorded us at the same time.
That makes sense because your characters had chemistry in how they talked to each other, I felt, as a viewer.
Yes,
I was also a
absolutely.
kid. But
Yeah.
So were you there when certain people were developing their characters? Because I know there were some actors who played multiple characters at a time.
It's in the animation voiceover business, it moves so quickly. And there's always a producer around, an exec around. Let's move this thing along. He's whispering in the writers and the directors here, move it along. So whatever development is done within seconds.
Oh, okay.
By the actor. They really cast for type.
Okay.
And at the casting session, Wally Burr and some of the Hasbro people were very specific faster, more action. You know, you've got a space dinosaur is strangling you. You're about to die. Get angry. So they knew what they were getting.
Right.
And you know, unlike television where they're willing to gamble on younger, inexperienced actors because they look right, most of us were a little bit older. I don't remember anybody in their 20s, and a little more experienced. So it was really done in the casting, and you knew what character you were playing. And Wally's direction almost exclusively consisted of slow it down, you know, get 3 or 4 syllables. You get angry here, shout louder, you know, don't overlap. And because I think one of the reasons for the success of both Transformers and G.I. Joe, the TV cartoons, was they were really among, if not the only American television cartoons that employed a naturalistic vocal style from the actors.
Yeah.
We weren't Smurfs doing get. You know, we weren't doing character voices. We were doing naturalistic characters. And you know, ultimately they developed about 85 different members of the Joe team, all of them with you know, different crazy names, you know, Snowflake, Dog Breath. You know?
Well, Flint was named after a writer for G.I. Joe, wasn't he?
I don't know. I don't know the answer. I should know this, Craig.
Oh, that's okay. I think it was Flint, Dille, how you pronounce his last name.
Could very well be, but we were sort of kept separate. We rarely met any of the writers except after the fact, like at a Comic-Con or something.
Now, you've probably gotten asked this question a lot of times. What was Chris Latta like?
Chris Latta was doing stand-up at the time, and he was a very animated guy. He was hyper. He had to have been the ADHD kid in junior high. He got thrown out of class all the time. I saw a stand-up act once, and he was funny, a little hyper, a little crazy, did a lot of voices. He didn't care about it. I think he smoked cigarettes, and he just didn't care. He just did his character, and just wore the heck out of his voice. And he and Arthur would go off for mysterious lunches and come back, and Wally would say, "Well, where have you guys been? We were 20 minutes late." And you know, Destro and Cobra Commander doing their thing in the parking lot. But he was, you know, he was not a dear friend. He was a dear colleague. Kind of not unlike his character without the space weapons, you know.
One thing I've always wondered, so in at least the 85 and 86 seasons, Flint was the one to go Yo Joe at the start of the opening titles, but was that you?
You know, I think they recorded that song with a
Michael Bell, right?
With a chorus,
okay,
live chorus, and a music contractor who probably had one of the singers yell Yo Joe. That was definitely not me.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
So that was a totally separate. And then the announce done by a great New York, a deep throat New York announcer, was done in New York. G.I. Joe, blah blah blah. That had nothing to do with Burbank or Studio City, and that was, you know, the music and the chorus and the Yo Joe and the announce were tacked on, and then all the rest of it was done in Studio City with the actor.
I learned something. That's great. So when you guys did G.I. Joe the movie, did you ever get so far as recording dialogue that Duke had died? Because, you know, we all know that story that he was supposed to die, but then Transformers killed Optimus Prime, and they didn't want to traumatize children.
There was, I don't know if this is history or myth, but I heard what sounded like a factual report that a print of G.I. Joe the movie was screened during Comic-Con out in the suburbs of San Diego. And a bus was provided by Hasbro and Sunbow, and in which Duke was killed.
Oh, wow. Because you watch
And-
the movie and it looks like he died.
right.
Yeah.
And there was a massive protest on the part of the the GI Joe, the pro Joe Yo Joe activists who said, "You can't kill off Duke. We're watching the television. What are you doing?" And I think some editing was done to make it a little. They didn't want to spend much money on it. They didn't know how it would do, and so I think some editing, audio and video, might have been done before they, minted the prints and sent them out for national distribution. But I don't think it had a. I think it went straight to VHS
It
and
did.
Betamax.
Like, this was the first time I saw it in theaters, was 2 weeks ago. 35
How did
years
you?
later.
What kind of screening was it? Was it a private or
Fathom
public
Events
screening?
did it. Fathom Events, they do the special screenings at movie theaters.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I just bought a ticket, I didn't go as press or anything. And it was
Right.
just, I was like, I have to go see this. I mean, I didn't get to see it in theaters. I mean, I remember 1987 being a kid and seeing in my TV guide that there's a 2.5 hour GI Joe on.
Right.
I watched it that way originally.
Right. And you were able to buy the VHS or the Betamax.
Yeah.
But I think that it was conservative thinking on the part of Hasbro and Sunbow that said we're not going to make any money off this, and the possibility that the protest
Yeah.
affected if people aren't going to go. That was one of the reasons Peter Cullen was kept on in the Transformers movie as the voice of Optimus Prime. There was a huge groundswell of protest. I think Universal or Paramount rather announced, we're thinking of Matt Damon or Tom Cruise or some star to play the voice of Optimus Prime, and enough people emailed and sent dog do in the mail to the Paramount gates that they kept Peter Cullen on. So that the ability of activists to affect media decisions is real.
Well, I assume people like Seth MacFarlane might have been fans of your work as Flint, because he got you onto Family Guy, and I believe there have been other shows. Community also had you
Yeah.
on as Flint. Can you talk about that?
This was a funny one. Seth MacFarlane by that point was a big star. I don't know if he'd hosted the Oscars yet, but he was big stuff with Family Guy. And my agent called and said, Family Guy wants to do a Flint episode. I said, oh, how exciting. But we went back and forth because these days voiceover guys like myself are kind of stuck in our basements. And we book ourselves up and we can't get across town. And Fox was across town, way across town on the west side. And I wasn't being weird. I wanted to do it, but I guess I can't. I don't know how we can do this. Can they do it at 2:45 on a Thursday? Blah blah blah. And because they wanted to record it in their own facility on the lot at 20th Century Fox, which is certainly fancier than my basement. But finally, they said, all right, they'll do it. You can record it in your studio and just send them the file. And it was at 2:30 p.m. and Seth MacFarlane is on the phone. Would you hold for Mr. MacFarlane? Yeah. Hi, is this Flint? Yeah. Who's this? This is Seth MacFarlane. Hey, Seth, nice to meet you. And I was kind of, intimidated. He's a big star, big time. And he was nervous.
Yeah.
Listen, Mr. Ratner, I think he called me Mr. Ratner. I just want to say that I was a huge fan. And I went, yes, the tables have turned. All right, finally my just desserts. And it's a wacky episode in Family Guy. And Seth Green, who was doing Robot Chicken, said, well, I want to do a Flint episode. So we did a couple, and I played a few other weird parts. And Robot Chicken was so funny and out there and weird that was fun as well. And then Community came along with the whole GI Joe episode.
Yeah, that was amazing.
He has this nightmare, right, where he's in the GI Joe movie.
So after GI Joe the movie, GI Joe moved to DiC, which was a different animation studio, and a lot of the familiar voices weren't able to continue with it. Can you talk about why that happened for those who might not know?
Well, you and I were talking about that just a few minutes ago. In I think 86, near the end of our second year, we had recorded 52 episodes. and they had begun to air successfully, and they were into syndication, and it was making Hasbro just a ton of money. And they had invented more and more and more characters to sell more and more and more action figures and vehicles and so on, such as the one pictured behind you. And
Or
uh,
figure right here.
oh, thank you, thank you. And we were all members of the Screen Actors Guild, which is it was 120,000 people in New York and Chicago, and from everywhere from Tom Cruise to hand models in Cleveland doing TV commercials. And the voice actors, not our crew, because they limited us to doing our character and then maybe a few minor roles, a few lines.
Yeah.
But we didn't walk out of our 3 and 4 hour sessions with losing our voices. We had to be careful because we were yelling, yo, you got to be louder. Come on, Cobra's on the way. But I think very few of us lost our voices. We had enough sort of voice training, and we weren't doing 5 and 6 main characters.
Mm-hmm.
But at other studios, could have been Disney, it could have been Hanna-Barbera, they were asking those actors, especially the experienced ones, to do long sessions for one session fee and all kinds of characters. Makes sense. Let's get this done here. Just have Michael Bell, versatile actors like that, do somebody else, do another Smurf. And so the Screen Actors Guild, our union, said to the producers, you got to limit to three voices, 3 characters per session. And they said, no, we're not going to do this. And Sunbow and Hasbro said to our unit, listen, if you guys go out on strike with the rest of your union, we're going to move it to Canada. And we couldn't, being members of the union, we're not going to go behind their backs and work non-union and say, screw everybody else, screw our friends, we don't care. So we walked the picket line, and we're striking against not Hasbro and Sunbow, but against the the collective production team of Paramount, Disney, 20th, Hanna-Barbera, et cetera, who all get greedy and want to work us to death and don't care if we lose our voices. So they did. They shut down American production, went to Canada, and it only lasted 1 season. And I think because the ratings tanked, because suddenly Duke was gone, Flint was gone, Lady J was gone, Scarlet was gone, all the favorite characters other than Destro and Cobra Commander were gone, replaced by characters who, it's so cold outside there. My tongue got stuck to the battery last night when I started up my attack vehicle. Out in a boat with Canadian accents. You can actually hear the accents. You go on Hulu and download episodes from season 3, and they all sound like they're from Toronto out there. Oh yeah.
Well, for the characters we love, some of them were played by different actors. Like Baroness was something completely different, and that to a child, that's weird because you're used to hearing a certain thing. So
right, and I'm sure you're right. I wasn't aware of how many of the actual. I don't think Flint was replaced, or the main 6 or 7. But yeah, a good handful of them were done by other actors, and it tanked and died. And but the good news is, because it was done under the aegis of the Screen Actors Guild, we began getting residual checks that every year are a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. I received a set of checks about 3 years ago. I think something like 36 individual checks. The highest amount was something like 88 cents. They were all like 12, 16 cents, 27 cents by the residual code and formula. And to this day, you can go to Hulu and download, probably 65 episodes, 13 of which are Canadian sounding, of G.I. Joe and of Transformers as well.
So beyond your voice acting work, you've also gotten awards for your poetry, your writing, and your spoken word performances. How did you become involved with that? Would you like to talk about it?
A friend of mine, I was in New York, and a friend of mine had moved there. And he said, have you ever heard of The Moth, as in, The Moth Radio Hour and so on, which is, on 500 stations. I said, no, what is the Moth? He said, well, it's a live storytelling show. It's in bars and coffee houses. There's one in Brooklyn. There's one in Manhattan. I didn't know there was one in Northeast LA, in Los Feliz, in a Korean barbecue joint that had a little 30-seat theater in the back. And he said they have themed storytellings. It's a competition, and you win a T-shirt, and it's show business was for that week. So I wrote a thing about rooming with the great Gary Marshall for an evening. He was a school grandpa. I was a school dad at a school in Studio City, and it turned out that the date was wrong, the week was wrong. I didn't get to perform it in New York. I thought, well, I'm going to go to the one in LA. And it was a different theme. I can't remember what it was. And I went and did my thing. And somebody in the back went, yeah, great. So I got harassed in my first, but I began competing. I got hooked. You write these 2.5-page, true stories, many of which are getting drunk at fraternity parties and barfing on your girlfriend. But some of them are dramatic, and some of them are funnier than that, and some of them are fascinating, and themes every different month. And the Moth has spread. It's all over the country, from Austin, Texas, to Miami, to New York, to LA, to Portland, to Seattle, to San Francisco. Live personal storytelling slams, competitions, and anybody can go and sign up. And you go on the website, themoth.org, and the theme is fast cars. Oh yeah, I remember I was 18, man, I got arrested, blah, blah, blah. And so that became so fun to do. And I started winning the slams and participating in the grand slams. And I sent a couple of my scripts in, you memorize them, or you just tell them, off the cuff on stage. I got a couple of them published, and I thought, well, no, this is highfalutin, man. This is classy, being in literary magazines. And I don't know if you remember a newspaper column called Notes from a Dirty Old Man. No. By the great Charles Bukowski, who was a severe alcoholic and a poet. And he wrote this newspaper column in poetry, very dirty, very funny, not really misogynistic, loved older women. And a friend of mine years and years ago said, I want to go see Charles Bukowski perform his poetry at a rock and roll club in Redondo Beach, California. I said, oh, okay. And the place was packed. It was a rock club, about 375 people at the Sweetwater. And there's a group of women down front, about a dozen of them, with black leather jackets and purple short hair. And they started harassing him. And he was very funny. He wrote poems about gambling, about drinking, about being dropped by large women larger than he, and funny and heartfelt. But these women were yelling at him, hey, Bukowski. And guards were having to go up, security, please, ladies, please. It turned out they had come to protest the publication of his novel called Women, which was very funny and very dark. And I didn't consider it sexist or misogynistic, but they did. And one of them, near the end of his brilliant performance, and during which he downed a fifth of red wine on stage, very unceremoniously, just kept pouring and drinking, and like all alcoholics, didn't sound drunk. One of them said, hey, Bukowski, where's your wife? And he always had either a gorgeous, intelligent girlfriend, and was married at that point to a very bright woman. I think she was a doctorate and professor. And he said, well, when the whole show stopped, he put his poetry down, put his glass of wine down, pointed to the light booth, and said, well, she's up there right now. And everybody turned around to look, having sex with a light man. And that's what got me into poetry. I thought, if this is a man who is an American. He was born in Germany and came here when he was 3 years old with his parents. He was selling out sports stadiums in Germany, reading his crazy working man poetry in English. So I just happen to have my folk collection called Fear of Fish, available now wherever books are sold.
And you can find those on your website, correct?
Find it on my website. You can go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And for those of you who aren't depressed enough by COVID, how to decorate a casket. And I actually, right before the shutdown in March of 2020, I was trained as a volunteer grief counselor. I lost my family as a kid and ended up in public schools, junior high school, middle schools in LA, working with kids who had lost someone in their family in the last year to death, from gang violence to grandma dying of cancer. And it was the most amazing. I mean, these were GI Joe fans.
Yeah.
And there's kids, 40 years later, but still.
It was you talking to them.
Yeah, my Mr. Ratner, my dad used to watch you, and we have some of the VHSs. We still have a VHS player, and but doing that kind of work with kids, which grew out of Career Day. My daughters were going to a school, and they said, "Well, it's Career Day. Would you come and talk about being on GI Joe?" And then I started doing it in public schools with kids who didn't have the money to spend $1,500 on the entire set of action figures, and realizing that Hasbro, along with Mattel and every other toy maker, were doing massive advertising campaigns to children. Reagan was president. Ronald Reagan was president in the 80s when we were doing GI Joe and Transformers. And he successfully deregulated network television advertising for the first time since the 1930s, allowing unlimited franchising and advertising of action figures for the show, within the show. Previously, it had been illegal because they'd done studies on kids 7 and under. When they see a figure like Flint or Lady J, me want Dolly, me want Dolly. Mommy, me want Lady J. So it was forbidden to advertise action figures from that show within that show.
Right, I remember.
Until Ronnie Reagan said, "Oh, no, let's let Hasbro and Mattel make a couple of $1 billion." And of course, the stock, we were told on the first day of recording of GI Joe by a young woman who was passing out the scripts, "I'm supposed to tell you 2 things. First, no one dies in GI Joe because the parent groups were protesting. And number 2, you might want to think about buying Hasbro stock." And we started laughing. We said, "Wait a minute, who told you this?" "Oh, I'm not really supposed to say anything else," because it was insider trading.
Yeah.
I mean, they knew. And had we each of us gone out and spent $1,000 or $100 on Hasbro stock in 1983, by 1986, 87, we would have quintupled our money because of Transformers and GI Joe.
I should warn you, Zoom is telling me I only have 2 minutes left before it cuts out.
2 minutes. 2 minutes on KSite.
Yeah.
2 minutes with Craig Byrne, ladies and gentlemen.
I am so sorry. I'm having so much a great time talking to you. So why don't we use the last 2 minutes? Could you tell me about your upcoming memoir? And just what it's been like to you to see fans come to you all these years, and hopefully we won't get cut off.
COVID has cut into our fun by canceling Comic-Cons and so on, and we'll be back. But that's really been an incredibly fun thing, to meet fans who are all universally so nice and so much better educated than any of us are about media and media history. The memoir grew out of working in schools with kids, a program called TV Cartoon Scandals, trying to sort of level the playing field and let them know what TV advertising did. My dad was an advertising man. He died when I was 13. And so I ended up, I'm still working on it, still finishing it up, a memoir about growing up in a home where your father knows something about TV. Mm-hmm. And when I was 5 years old, he would make fun of the commercials. Then he'd go, look at that product, it's crap, son. All they want us to do is buy. When my favorite show, Fearless Fosdick, was canceled, he said, "Well, they're trying to sell us down the creek." He explained the economics of television to me and advertising and the selling of children's toys before I was 6. So growing up with a father like that, and then missing him, and then realizing how much I'd learned, and then going into his business as a talent, is what the story is about. Is called Announcing the Apocalypse by Bill Ratner. Coming soon to a bookstore near you.